Doing well.
Very good, thank you.
Well, I'm happy to report that I went to Santa Paula today and signed the bank stuff.
All right.
Go.
Beat the banking system. Only had to sign twice.
Want to make sure our checks go through, so that's important.
Thank you.
Oops, I still have my name tag on. Sorry.
Do we have everyone so far?
Yeah, we have all the directors,
Like it.
legal, executive.
Fabulous. All right, well then let's start. Good evening. Welcome to the Fillmore Piru Basin GSA. Really appreciate everyone coming on this October 20th. First of all, we will do a roll call.
Pledge of Allegiance.
Oh, sorry, missed it. Pledge of Allegiance.
Okay.
Yes, Director Jackson, could you lead us in that, please?
Yes, I can.
Okay.
I pledge allegiance
Allegiance
to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you. And now we'll do a roll call.
Okay. Okay. Director Fornoff,
Here.
Director Jackson,
Here.
Director Kimball,
Here.
Chair Long,
Here.
Director Minigan,
Here.
Director Villaseñor.
Here.
Perfect.
Thank you very much. And next is public comments. Do we have any public comments?
I don't see anything in the chat.
Okay, thank you. Then we will move on to the approval of the agenda. Mr. Emmerich, if you could lead us through the agenda. Any modifications?
Chair Long, no proposed modifications. However, no modifications.
Okay, with that then, can I get a motion to approve the agenda? Okay, I will give that to Director Minigan as a first and a second with Director Villaseñor.
Yes.
So any further discussion? Roll call, please.
Okay. Director Fornoff,
Aye.
Director Jackson,
Aye.
Director Kimball,
Aye.
Chair Long,
Aye.
Director Minigan,
Aye.
Director Villaseñor.
Aye.
Perfect.
Thank you. And so that motion has been approved. Next is our updates. First is our Fillmore Puppers Association.
Thank you. We have not met since the last GSA meeting. However, we have had some discussion of the well permitting guidelines, and the result of that discussion is in the letter that's attached in the board packet.
Thank you very much. And our Piru Pumpers Association.
Ditto.
Oh, well, that's easy. And our environmental stakeholders. Update.
I have a few things. So I have met with the Pacific Institute about developing a scope of work and a budget to do a cost-benefit analysis regionally in Ventura County with regards to water infrastructure and capital investment projects. I'm anticipating something back this week, at which point we'll be going to seek funding so that can potentially move forward. I did attend the California Lawyers Association's environmental conference in Yosemite from the 13th to the 16th. It's a past weekend. And they did have a CEQA update. And I did ask some questions about the GSA and the well permitting and the potential bill that's going to be coming back to the legislature from Assemblyman Steve Bennett. And I'm sure we'll discuss this a little bit more. But ultimately, if we are exercising any discretion, we definitely are open to a CEQA challenge. that said, we had the update from the Valencia and Saugus water treatment works at our last meeting. And as they indicated, they were going to ask for an extension from the Los Angeles Regional Water Quality Control Board. Those officially came through last week. And then Friends of the Santa Clara River, we're having our stewardship meeting at Hedrick Ranch Nature Area tomorrow. And I believe our well construction, the GSA's well construction is happening nearby. So I'm actually hoping to go and visit and get some photos of this momentous occasion. And then I did attend the United Water Sustainability Summit yesterday in part. The last thing was this past week was the Clean Water Act's 50th anniversary. And while we were up at the Yosemite conference, they provided a Lifetime Achievement Award to Jan Chatton Brown. And she was instrumental in cleaning up Los Angeles County's air quality under the Clean Air Act. And so, I don't know, maybe I'm just still on a high from a very interesting and inspirational conference, but I was just thinking, maybe, you know, if we do our jobs right, there'll be an anniversary of SGMA and some good things to look back on. So that's me for now. Thanks.
Thank you. In the city of Fillmore.
Hi, everyone. Just want to make sure you can hear me. Okay, a quick update from Fillmore is something that is water related, groundwater well related. Is about 2 years ago, the Shell station, when you come into town, mostly on the east side. Now, unfortunately, you've seen that there was unfortunately a big truck accident that, and then it burned. And so anyway, this area is no longer being used as a gas station, but 2 years ago it was. And they replaced the underground storage tanks and soil samples were taken. Ventura County Environmental Health Division did that. And based on that, it exceeded the LA County, the Regional Water Quality Control Board screening type criteria for petroleum hydrocarbon constituents. And so there will be 2 or 3 monitoring wells in that area. One on one side of 126 near to the Heritage Valley, the new homes, and then 2 very much right on top of the former 7-Eleven station. And we're gonna, so we basically as a city council, we approved that, and of course they're gonna monitor it. And so I will keep the board posted on how that goes, but it is something that was found here within the city of Fillmore. Let's see, then just other things happening, just FYI in town. For those who want to know, there's our annual trunk or treat is happening on Christmas Eve on Halloween. And so that's always a great event. It's on Central Avenue. And then 2 days later on Wednesday, the city has started doing a Dia de los Muertos event. So a couple of fun events to look forward to. And we have, of course, the election. And so I think when we meet next month, I may be able to tell you what our new city council makeup is. All right, thank you.
Thank you. And United?
As Candace said, United held the 3rd annual groundwater or water summit. And I think it was well attended and well received. And they talked about all the projects. And the last 15 or 20 minutes were the real nuggets. So they looked at Fox Canyon, at the current overdraft, or the current water use is about 80,000 acre feet per year, which is 40% over the safe yield of the basin. So they talked about the contribution of each project to available water, and if United is able to deliver on the promise of all of the all the projects that are either underway or being engineered, designed, and permitted, there will be no cutbacks required. They'll be able to supply a little over the current water use now. And then, so then the question was, well, what does that all cost us? And the current, or will cost the water users in the Fox Canyon Basin and or Fox Canyon. So it's really Oxnard, Pleasant Valley plus Las Posas basins, correctly speaking. Thank you, Tony. The current water cost is about $200 an acre foot in sort of fees, not the cost to pump it, but just the fees. If there are no projects and the water use is shrunk by 40%, the cost per acre foot goes up by basically $100 an acre foot, goes to $300, because you got less, you get the same cost of operations for United, spreading, collecting water, running the dam, spreading it. So then the question is, well, if we do all these projects, what is the cost? And the current estimate is that it will be $400 an acre foot. And in today's context, where the growers in Yuma are asking $1,500 an acre foot to fallow land, and the Bureau of Reclamation is offering $330 to $400 an acre foot to fallow land or cut back. $400 an acre foot is, if that really is true, it's pretty amazing. So United put it out there, and we're gonna do everything we can, providing inflation and permitting is allowed, to meet that. And if that's the case, it'll be a huge deal, because otherwise I think you're going to see, you're going to be some crop shifts to meet that 40%, but you're still going to see 20 or 25% of the land fallowed at some time during the year or over the year. And that's a big percentage, and that's a lot of jobs that just won't be there. So United is doing what it was created to do, which was manage and conserve the water so that there's enough for everybody, and it continues to do it. So stay tuned and keep it. If you haven't attend at these water summits, are quite interesting, and there's a lot of people, and so if you get a chance next year, attend. And I think I've gone on long enough.
Thank you very much. And for the county, I wanted to celebrate some good things in our basin. The Piru wastewater treatment plant, we're using ARPA funds, the American Relief Act. For the county, our Board of Supervisors on October 11th voted to approve the construction of a territory treatment facility to remove the high salt content from wastewater. And these upgrades will improve the water quality and the efficiency to meet the state water requirements. And so that is a $5 million investment in that disadvantaged community, and wanted to really, I think that's going to be very helpful for us. And then also we have another sustainability upgrade for the Piru wastewater treatment plant, which is the installation of solar photovoltaic facility at the Piru wastewater treatment plant for Water District 16, and this will provide carbon-free power and reduce operation costs associated with it, and that's the $1,200. So wanted to make sure everyone knew the investment that the county is making at that level there, and that it also will affect us with groundwater sustainability and water quality being two key ones I can see right off the bat. So thank you to the United for their third year of summit. It was very good. And I appreciate that it was also online as well. So if you weren't able to attend, you're still able to view the comments and the good panels. So thank you. With that, I will now pass that over to the executive director's update.
Thank you, Chair Long. I don't have an exact count on the Water Supply Summit, but I've been to all three of them. And I honestly think this third one was the best. There was good progress in several areas. And I think there were probably about 75 people in the room. And I heard that there were over 100 in the virtual participation. So that's really saying something to get that kind of participation. And so that's very encouraging to me. That I didn't intend to talk about that, but I'll just pile on that I am really heartened to see people participating in water. And there were a couple council members and one of the Board of Supervisors that participated. And that's very encouraging to see. We get to enjoy Supervisor Long's participation every month in this, but it's tough to make the time to do that. So we appreciate that. A couple things. Director Menigan mentioned that our monitoring wells projects are, I believe I reported last time that they were permitted and ready to go, and they are well along the way. So the mud rig that's drilling at the site off of South Mountain Road, just east of the boundary of the Fillmore-Santa Paula Basin, that is on site and working away. And that pilot hole goes down about 800 feet, and the team is actually proposing perhaps a 4 completion monitoring well there instead of the original 3, because they feel like there's some additional data that we could get. And so we may get that out of that project. And the drilling at the Cienega site at the Piru-Fillmore Basin boundary, all 3 of those are completed. And so they'll be wrapping up that project really soon. So good news on that. And for our grant, I might not have looked like it, but I was sweating a little bit on getting those easements done and getting a driller procured and getting them on the schedule and out there at those 2 sites and being able to invoice before the end of the calendar year. So I'm very happy that that this is moving along well. And Eric is out there right now, associated out there monitoring both of those, assisted by Kat Cooper. And so I didn't ask him to take extra time to put some photos together, but I think he will probably be able to come next month and we can share some construction photos out there. So good news on that. Not that everybody's excited about groundwater charges, but payments for our agency's groundwater charges were due on the 15th. So I can give a report on that at next month. Groundwater Sustainability Planning Grant, we are working on the 14th quarterly report for that. Sustainable Groundwater Management Grant Program, I believe last month on the 29th, we talked about that may be released very soon by DWR. Well, a few days later, it was released, and they're expecting up to $230 million for that project, dependent upon the state budget, of course. And those grant packages are due November 30th. So we'll be talking a little bit later on trying to tidy up a package that your board would be comfortable with us applying for. And a couple of weeks ago, I put out a request for qualifications for grant assistance. And it's just request for qualifications. So the goal would be when we have these grants come up, it's a little bit late to ask for grant assistance and putting some of these packages together. And we may not actually enjoy, assuming that we have somebody and we're able to find somebody, the goal would be to perhaps put them on a master contract. And then as a grant comes up and the agency decides to use them, then you'd put a task order together and that would be brought before the board. Another one that I probably will be sending out a request for qualifications on for us is that as we transition from the planning mode to the implementation mode, and it looks like we're in that process at this point. We've submitted our GSPs during 2022. We're talking about what we're going to be doing in the future. And as we make that transition, then Sigma requires us to do a Proposition 218 process. And so, those that are Director Villaseñor is very familiar with that, with city rates. I can't say that I'm looking forward to that, but that's something that we're required by Sigma to do. And that makes it, it lengthens the schedule of our fees setting. There's a 45-day notice and a essentially no vote is offered to the to those that pay this. So so I think it will be a very good idea to bring on somebody who can help us package that in a way that is compliant with both Proposition 26 and Proposition 218. And of course, we'll work with our legal counsel on that as we go forward. But it's not too soon to put the team together for that. I feel like this board and the agency has been very reasonable and conscious of the pumpers who pay for the activities, and so hopefully that good communication leads towards them understanding what we're doing and understanding why we have the charges. But I'll be doing some homework on who might be available to help us with that, and then also I think we have a date. It looks like it works well for everybody to celebrate Glenn Pace's 5 years plus and helping this agency get started and helping establish the Piru Basin Pumpers Association. And so I believe the date that looked like it would work with everybody was November 2nd. Does that still sound like that would work? I think I was looking at Eva over here and she's labeled Chris, but that's because she's using Chris's account. So if that still works, then we will get that scheduled to be at El Pescador again, and we can drag Glenn Pace back for one last time. Hopefully he stays engaged in all of this, because I think we benefited from his comments and his clear thinking and communication with folks. So that's all I had. I did want to, I believe that Director Menigan had a suggested edit to the minutes. So when we get to that, we just want to be careful to make sure and address that before we jump right into the consent calendar, which I think is pretty quick here. And that's all I had, Chair Long.
Okay, thank you very much. And next up is legal.
Thank you, Chair Long. I just wanted to report on some developments concerning our abilities to meet through virtual meetings and remote teleconferencing. As you know, we're operating under Assembly Bill 361 and its requirements for teleconferencing. And there's been a few developments in that regard I thought I'd bring to the board's attention. One of the preconditions to allow us to have these teleconference meetings or these virtual meetings is a state of emergency declared by the governor. And that was done quite a while ago, but you may have noticed that last week the governor indicated that he's going to essentially repeal the state of emergency effective February 2023. So that will, in our view, that's one of the fundamental preconditions to having the meetings that we've been having virtually under the conditions that we're meeting. So in February, things may change. And I think we may have to go back to the pre-pandemic Brown Act requirements, which still allow for teleconference meetings. It's just there's certain conditions that have to be met. Importantly, those conditions are that when the agenda is posted, it must include the address of anyone participating remotely. The remote location also has to include the agenda has to be posted at the remote location, and the remote location has to be available to the public. And really the last kind of element of that is that a quorum of the body has to be meeting within the boundaries of the body. So it's a return to those prior requirements pre-pandemic. You may have heard of Assembly Bill 2449 that was passed by Assemblywoman Rubio, which is an attempt to come up with somewhat of an alternative to AB 361. But in our view, and in my discussions with a lot of other public agency lawyers, it's somewhat onerous in that it does excuse some of the existing Brown Act pre-pandemic requirements about posting the agenda and not making those remote locations open to the public. However, it requires that that there be like a precondition, either a director would have to declare that there's just cause for that director to meet remotely or some emergency circumstances. Also, it requires that a quorum be present in one physical location within the boundaries of the agency, a little different than the pre-pandemic or the existing Brown Act requirements. There's pretty formal requirements about access. There has to be two-way audiovisual platform available, if not two-way telephonic availability with a live stream. And there's just some curious provisions that limit the number of times that a director could avail themselves of this. So this is a little premature, I know, because it looks like we can continue on AB 361 up until February, but at that time, I guess we can have a discussion about how the board wants to move forward. But I just wanted to bring this to your attention because of the announcement last week by the governor and the recent passage or adoption of the bill. And other than that, our activities for the last month have consisted of working with the two Tonys on some questions we got on the GSP that I think are on today's agenda.
Thank you very much, Steve. I would like you to, when we get to the end, is to come back with more information on that. My understanding is that the quorum has to be in a certain location where the meeting is, but others, if there are items you have to submit less than 20 words, why you're not attending, like you're sick or you're traveling, things like that. And that your address does not need to be posted for where your location is, but that your camera needs to be on with the Zoom. Right. And I'd like to understand how we engage with the public as well with it, just to make sure that our whole board is very clear on it. I would appreciate that. I know that the board members have to, I think it's 20% can be out in Zoom. Based on some other boards that I'm on with the updates that their council gave to me. It might be flexible, but the question to me would then be for Tonya Emmerich later on and to come back as to what location could we do this where there was Zoom and everything else.
Yeah.
So those are questions that I'll have for us to come back at a later time. Gordon, I saw your hand up. Director Kimball.
Yeah, I was just gonna talk about location and in pre-planning, or if we end up back at city council chambers, to try to book it now or see how much conflict it's going to be next year, because that's probably the logical physical meeting and maybe the best chance for the combined Zoom in person if we do that. So yeah.
Okay,
Oh,
so we'll
Chair Long, one quick comment on this, and I don't think we're getting into a Brown Act discussion here, is I believe I did let the board know that we reached out to the city of Fillmore in anticipation of this, and your board had desired to retain the ability to have remote participation by stakeholders. And the city of Fillmore's council chambers is not currently set up for the hybrid type style. United's tech staff offered some help, but the city manager at the time said that they had a request for proposals out for a new IT consultant. And so I will circle back with Director Villasenor and the city manager and see if they're potentially ready to talk about that, and we can evaluate and bring back as a future item our options on that, because I think we may be able to help upgrade that. And then so we'll work with legal, and maybe we can put an agenda item to have a little bit more detailed discussion on for future.
thank you. Okay, now we have our GSP consultant update.
Evening, everybody. So we've been spending some time on a few activities recently. The well permit review process flow chart is a conversation that we're going to wrestle with a little bit more in item 4A tonight, so I'm not going to spend time on that here. Working on the projects and management actions that could be rolled forward into the round 2 Sigma grant is something that the executive director and United staff and DBSNA staff have been chatting about and working up a plan of attack for that. The online database hosting and upgrades, that's all ongoing work. The redacted well completion reports are now online. So when you click on the online database and you go into a particular little dot on there, a green dot on the screen, and you click on that and click on the extended details, you'll be able to see the redacted well completion report for that particular well. So I'll give you a little bit more information there potentially. We are making some minor updates to the data fields to add a little more functionality to it. That's just resulting from us using the database and seeing some things that could be smoother, easier for the public to do. So we're cleaning up those things on behalf. And we're also putting together a data dictionary, so the system knowledge is kind of memorialized in a document and just isn't contained in the brains or on the servers of DBSNA personnel or equipment. So the NSAR subsidence update is ongoing. And interestingly enough, today was a about 2-hour webinar from DWR on the Sigma Round 2 grant application process. And so it was very well attended. Lots of folks are looking to have their hand out for this pot of money. So it was good to hear some of the information from DWR about their perceptions of how this is going to go. And they made it very, very clear. Do not deviate from the forms and the plans that they have in there. If you deviate, the odds are you will end up in the circular can and will not be considered for grant money. So that's it for me, unless there are some questions. Thank you, Chair.
Okay, any questions? All right, moving on to our consent calendar. Does anyone have any questions on any of the items within the consent calendar?
Chair Long, I think this would be where Director Menningen might point out the change in the draft minutes.
Yeah, it's just a minor one. It was under my environmental director update. It was just in the third sentence, I said that I mentioned the Pacific Institute presented cost benefit analysis regarding water projects and benefits of projects. And that was at the Localizing California Water event. And then just to provide better context, I added update under RWM plan in the following sentence. And then the following sentence, I said, she stated that she'll be meeting with Pacific Institute to define the scope of work and determine a budget to revise a regional water project cost benefit analysis report. And then the following sentence says, I spoke to Assembly Member Steve Bennett on September 12th, and there was just, I added about the legislature potentially funding a pilot project. And then just the California, and then correcting it to the California Lawyers Association Environmental Conference. I provided these redlined and to Ava via email, but I just, yeah, wanted to provide more clarity in what my update said. Thanks.
Okay, so then it would be to approve the consent calendars with the amendments from Director Minigan on the minutes dated September 29th, 2022. So if I can get a motion for that.
I'll make that motion to adopt the consent calendar with those corrections from Director Minigan, September 29th.
Thank you. And a second, please.
I'll second.
Okay, so first by Director Villasenor and second by Director Forno. With that, roll call, please.
Okay, Director Fornoff,
Aye.
Director Jackson,
Aye.
Director Kimball.
Aye.
Chair Long,
Aye.
Director Minigan,
Aye.
Director Villasenor.
Aye.
Perfect.
Okay, that motion is approved unanimously. Moving on to item 4A, development of the well permitting review process in compliance with the California Executive Order N722. So I believe this is for Steve. Is this you, or are we kicking it off with Mr. Emmerich?
I think it would be with Tony.
Yes, sorry about that. I just muted myself because I ripped a piece of paper and didn't unmute. If you recall, when we started this process, this all started because the governor issued the executive order. Early on, we had Assembly Bill 2201 that was a little bit different than the executive order. And in order to facilitate discussion, we put together, we asked DBSNA to put together with us the flow chart to talk this through. And I think we had some initial examples that we thought about, and our initial purpose was to improve the dialogue on this and to essentially hear back from those that would be regulated by this. So those that would be applying for these permits with the county and that we would be reviewing. At this point, a week or so ago, we received a thorough comment letter from the two pumpers associations. And as our Pumpers Association directors shared earlier, there has been a significant amount of discussion there. I believe it was just yesterday, we were able to, seems like a long time ago, but I think it was just yesterday morning that we were able to meet with Brian Bondi, who is the Pumpers Association's consultant, as well as the two directors, and talk a little bit more of the details of their comments. And they raised some excellent questions about how all of this fits. The county's role versus the GSA's role, whether things that we have in the flow chart are whose responsibility those are, how CEQA fits into this. And so I think from my point of view, I would like to meet with legal counsel and DBSNA following this. We did not really have the time since we had that meeting yesterday to do so. And I'm hoping to meet with legal counsel and Tony Morgan tomorrow, and then bring back a proposed changes and how we would handle some of these. One thing that I intended to do and have not been able to do is to put together a written procedural document that goes along with the flow chart, because there is some nuance in some of these things, and it's been extremely helpful. That I thought of a few different scenarios that we asked DBSNA to put the flow chart together on, and we put some things in the initial flow chart to initiate discussion, like so many feet of drawdown, or in well interference, or so many feet of drawdown that would be near a GDE area. And so I think we have achieved what we originally started in having and getting that discussion started. And so so yeah, my proposal would be that we allow that discussion with legal counsel and the consultant, and then bring something back to this board. And I think I saw Brian Bondi on, and we obviously have Director Jackson and Director Fornoff. And if you want to add any statements at this point, but I really appreciate the time that the Pumpers Association took to think about these.
No, thank you. We really appreciate your willingness to entertain our ideas and opinions and meet with us. And I think this idea of going back and meeting and then coming back next month with something is a very good one. I support that.
Thank you. The other party that's involved in this is the county, and Dan Detmer and I have met with county staff a couple times, and there are some gorillas that this very county staff is wrestling with that are probably much larger in perspective to this. So we have received fairly minimal feedback from county staff, but clearly this executive order does put responsibility on the county. And so that is another important part of this is, as we put our flow chart together, then this really needs to be something that is a joint flow chart. And that's in response to your director's direction to us early on to say, we don't want to make something a bigger deal than it is. We want to comply with this executive order. We want to, do our best to give advice to the issuing agency regarding things that might be a problem for our GSPs and our sustainability. And but we don't want to load extra bureaucracy and extra cost. And I think we've all received that. The last thing you want to do is go to the county permit counter, and then they say, oh, you got to talk to Fillmore and Piru GSA, and then, oh, you got to go back to the county. We'd like to have this be a coordinated process. So the county and this GSA are working off the same sheet of music, and whoever gets the request first will have the right forms and have the right procedure so that we can make this straightforward. We didn't necessarily ask for this to be dropped on us at this time, but it is an executive order that we need to comply with. And I think it has caused us to dig into and think about some things that really are within the responsibility basket of this GSA. Thank you.
Director Binigan, question?
Yeah, Tony, are you speaking to County Public Works or County Council?
Director Minigan, that's a good question. We have not talked to County Council, and that will be part of our discussion tomorrow.
Okay.
We have talked to essentially Watershed Protection District leadership. So the leadership of the Water Resources Group and the director over Watershed Protection. And, you know, there's been some good feedback there, but like I said, it is not their current top priority. And, you know, we have a couple of these well reviews that were fairly straightforward that have gone through the process. So that helps us a little bit in figuring out how this might work. And I think that is a step after the meeting yesterday. We said, you know, we probably need to, it's probably going to be Alberto Boada in the county council's office that we're going to need to talk to. And there may be some coordination between Mr. O'Neill and Mr. Boada on this.
All right. And then just a follow-up question, and this is more directed for Mr. O'Neill and your subsequent conversations tomorrow. Steve, you had mentioned earlier that there was some sort of mechanism where we could have the county assume responsibility. I'm just wondering, because my takeaway from the Lawyers Association conference was if we are exercising any discretion, we are open to litigation under CEQA. And so, I mean, for me, as a GSA rep, we obviously want to minimize that. So if there is a way, I don't recall what you had mentioned, but like, is maybe you can jump in here if you know what you had. But,
yeah, what we've been looking at is this issue of a discretionary act versus a ministerial act.
Mhm.
And talking with Tony Morgan and looking at the issue, you know, to the extent we can make this a ministerial act,
yeah.
it gives us more protection from liability from a challenge. And part of the thinking behind creating a flow chart, which, you know, incorporates the agency's policy, is that it would give us put us in the posture of staff really, you know, executing pursuant to the flow chart, and that's really a ministerial act and not a discretionary act. It's not a panacea. There's no hardcore, excuse me, no hard answer to that, but it does, we think, position us better to protect us from a challenge, or in the event of a challenge.
Yeah. So aside from a flow chart, there's no way that we could provide the levels and information to the county, and that decision is still being made by the county's permitting division, so that, you know, they, through their process, because they're the issuing agent, are using information we've provided to them, but we're not making a decision.
Right. The county is ultimately the permitting agency, and the executive order, you know, puts us in a bit of a box. I mean, it says that we have to conclude that what they're going to do is not inconsistent with our GSP. You know, we're trying to come up with a way to, because that sounds like it's a somewhat discretionary or a judgment that requires some discretion. So the thinking is a flow chart where our staff is administering pursuant to preset policy would give us a little more protection.
So just one follow-up question. With air pollution control districts, they have set criteria and that guidance is provided to the county. Could we not do something similar where we provide the guidance and then the county makes the decision? It's not even a flow chart.
We could. I mean, that's something I guess I can talk to Alberto about what would be best for them. But As we've seen with the comments we've received, there's questions about some of the parameters that have been established.
Mhm.
And by doing that, we are, are we exercising discretion? It's, that executive order, I think, puts some responsibilities on the GSA that didn't exist when the law was passed. And so we're trying to work, I'm sure like most GSAs, we're trying to work our way through that.
Okay. All right, thank you.
Okay, and Director Fornoff, did you have a question?
I did, but then I'm starting to dig myself in a hole with all this technical. But are there parts of this flow chart where the GSA responsibility just stops and it can head to the county? Or is this all of our responsibility? That's one question I didn't ask the other day.
I
can try to answer that. I think maybe the one that you're thinking of is the well interference one.
That's one.
That one clearly says that it's the county that has to determine that. And in that one, we've provided them some information. But it is ultimately the county that's making that permit decision.
Right. Any other questions? I think I saw Brian Bondi. Did you have a question? I just saw your sunset. With a hand up.
I was just, thank you. I took my hand down. I think Steve O'Neill answered the question. The issue of CEQA applying to permitting, I just wanted to make the point that this GSA is not issuing a permit. And I don't know from a legal perspective if that's an important distinction or not, but it seemed worth raising. Thank you.
Thank you. Appreciate that. And Director Kimball, did you have a comment?
Yeah. It's a question for Steve. Does the executive order effectively make even the county's granting a permit discretionary? So it will be a CEQA process. Does it actually change? So the county will be responsible for executing or managing a CEQA process for every well permit?
I don't think it changes that status quo, that the county will be the agency issuing the permit. Is that an action for that's subject to CEQA? It's up to the plaintiff. And so, someone may bring an action saying that constitutes an action for purposes of CEQA.
And someone did this year, so that legal precedent is out there. And when I said, like, so if the county is coming to us as a GSA, they asking for our, thumbs up or thumbs down recommendation, we are exercising discretion. And the answer I got was, well, then that also opens us up to CEQA litigation. Yeah. The short answer is I also got told, well, that sounds like a wonderful legal question for a law student to explore, because everybody doesn't know, and it's only going to, be unpacked once there's a litigation.
But Chair Long, I think your staff and consultant and legal counsel will do our best to make as few a discretionary sounding or seeming decisions as we can. So I think that's very good advice, to be cautious and to offer information to the agency that that is already tasked with making that decision. And then that will be county staff's decision on how they do this with respect to CEQA. But I think it behooves us to be very careful about that and not take on more discretion than the executive order makes us.
Agreed. And so with that, this would be a motion to receive and file, or do we need a motion on this at all?
Chair Long, I think it would be receive and file. I was just hoping to have this kind of a conversation, that we work through this new issue. So this has been very helpful. And we will follow up and try to work through the details of these things and bring this back.
Thank you very much. So can I get a motion to receive and file?
I so move.
Thank you. And Director Jackson, and a second, please.
A second.
Okay, thank you, Director Nora. Warnoff. Oh, I'm tired. Sorry. Please roll call. Roll call, please.
Oh, you're on mute.
Good, I'm not the only one.
Sorry about that. Okay, here we go. Director Fornoff,
Aye.
Director Jackson,
Aye.
Director Kimball,
Aye.
Chair Long,
Aye.
Director Minigan,
Aye.
Director Villaseñor.
Aye.
Perfect.
Okay, motion is approved unanimously, and thank you for the good discussion. Next up, we have our projects and management actions.
Chair Long, I'd like to just go right to Tony Morgan, and we have spent some time since the last meeting trying to refine the discussions down into something that looks like could be dropped into a budget and into a grant application. And so we like to walk through that with you and receive your feedback and input. Because if we are going to apply for a SGM Sigma implementation round 2 grant, we got to get busy. So Tony.
Sure. Thank you. Last couple of meetings, the directors have seen a chart that looks something like this. That has a list of potential projects and some educated guesstimates of what the grant amount that could be associated with those. And this one in particular shows on the far right-hand column amounts that were awarded to round 1 applicants for that same kind of work. And so you can see there's some pretty big numbers in there as we talked before. But we really appreciate the director's discussions on these last couple of meetings where we went through these potential projects and sort of winnowed down the list of, hey, keep that, not so much that, or maybe it's not so much that, it's not right now. We might do that later, but not right now. And so what we have is an updated table that looks like this, and I put color coding on it so you won't get the two confused. You'll recognize that this is the more recent one, and it's got a date in the upper left-hand part there, so we can keep the sequences of the charts in order. And so we sort of categorized the potential projects into grants, drought mitigation, subsidence, GSP revisions, updates, stakeholder outreach, CEQA compliance, Prop 218-26, and then special studies was the final category there. And so this is the final list that sort of came about from the director's discussions at the last couple of meetings, conversations between the executive director, myself, and United staff on what kinds of things that we wanted to put in there. And so I'd like to just run down those real quickly, just to give you a quick synopsis of what they are. And then we can go back and go into detail into any of those that you would like. As Mr. Emmert mentioned before, we have rounded off a month to get our grant application composed and ready for submittal to DWR for their consideration. So we will need to finalize the list of projects that we wish to go request funding for. So the first two here, lines 1 and 2, are dealing with the grant itself. And so you are allowed to request funds for the grant administration. And as the executive director can tell you, administering these grants is not a small task. It's not for the faint of heart. There are papers to be filled out and things like that. So it is fair to ask for funding to do that. And we've put that money in here, and the DWR has limited that dollar amount for administration to no more than 10% of the grant award amount. So if ultimately DWR comes in and says, we don't like numbers, whatever, this number and this number, we're going to take that out of your list of projects, that ground administration amount would go down accordingly. So that's a fair number to ask for, and it turns out to be a substantial number. Again, these numbers can be adjusted. They're in there as placeholders right now, so we can get a general feel for the magnitude of the amount of the applications. So second one is you can, interestingly enough, ask for funding for preparation of your grants applications. So that's good. That's always in arrears. So you're hoping you win, so you get your money back for preparing the grant application that you just submitted. The next one is the drought mitigation category, and there are a couple of categories there, projects there. One is the Cienega Springs Drought Refuge Pilot Program. We've been talking about that. That was one of the projects that was included in the GSP as a project that the board would like to move forward with. So there's funding in there allocated to that program. The domestic well drought vulnerability evaluation was a topic that came up a couple of times in board discussions recently. And the feeling that, yeah, we probably ought to do more on that effort. And let's add that to the list of potential projects that we would request funding for. We all know and have heard from DWR that domestic well vulnerability is a hot topic with them. They are very, very interested. Even if it's not an issue in our basin, it seems appropriate that we do the necessary detailed evaluations and be able to check the box that we've done an evaluation and this is the findings that we have. And then if anything is necessary to be done, then the board can consider what the mitigative steps would be associated with that. So that's was inserted into the list based on comments and questions and discussions from the last couple of board meetings. The subsidence module has 3 elements to it. One was, I'll jump to number 6 real quick, was to ask United to update the groundwater flow model in the basin. The model there is a somewhat regional scale model, and to do some of the things that would be nice to do, it would be nice to refine that model and make it a little more detailed. It's called discretization of the model. And so if you remember when we were talking about the model, it's divided up into little cells in 2,000 feet on a side, and they're scattered across the basins. And so if we narrow down the size of those cells, we can get a little more detail, be a little more precise with the conclusions we drive from simulating future climate change or pumping scenarios or whatever. And so we felt that that would be a valid thing to ask for money for and be extremely helpful to the agency going down the road. Once we do that, then it's possible to add in the subsidence module. There is a module that can go onto your groundwater flow model and help you estimate where subsidence is likely to occur under certain water pumping scenarios. So we thought that was necessary. It doesn't tell you that it's going to occur. It just tells you areas where it might occur based on certain conditions. And finally, under subsidence, as you know, we're working on the contract to do the annual report on what the INSAR data, the satellite data, show us to date. And so we thought it appropriate to go ahead and put in funding there for the annual reports for INSAR through the next few years. And then going back to 22, since you can go back to October of that time period of 2022 to request reimbursement. GSP revisions and updates. It was interesting to see the round 1 results and that people were requesting money for GSP revisions and updates to it. And it was kind of a chuckle moment amongst the crowd that was on the DWR webinar today when people were saying, gee, we'd like to ask for funding to help with the GSP revisions and updates, but we haven't gotten your comments yet, DWR, so we don't know what to put in there for a dollar amount. And DWR's response, I thought, was very clever. They said, well, we suggest you go look at all of the GSPs that we have done and released. You compare them to your GSP, and if you think we're going to ding you on something based on what you see in the previous GSPs, then you should put in money to cover yourself for that. So it's kind of like, well, I'm going to write a grant application that says, hey, I think we're deficient here. Please ding us because we've asked for money. So it was kind of a clever idea from DWR to sort of get us to help them with their evaluation of the GSPs. But nonetheless, that is a fair cost to put in there. Some folks have been asking for funds for the GSP updates, and they, as of today, have announced that they've extended. You can see down here at the bottom that your reimbursable costs extend through April of 2026. And so there's a chance, I think a good chance, that we would be in the midst of GSP updates, the 5-year update at that point in time. So I think it would be appropriate and fair to ask for some money for the GSP updates. However much we want to ask for is a conversation for the board to have with staff once they develop a little more scope to each of these things. Once again, annual reports to the DWR, that's certainly a reimbursable item. So you might as well get some funding for that as well. Then as we went through the kinds of processes that are coming up, and some of our previous discussions this evening, we're talking about Prop 26, 218, CEQA compliance and those kinds of things. We felt it was appropriate to put in some funding for stakeholder outreach, a rate consultant, someone to help us with the 218-26 process, maybe someone to help with CEQA compliance should that be necessary down the road for any of the projects. So there's line items in for that, and token amounts of funding in there for that particular line item. The bottom line item there, number 14, is, we just called it special studies for lack of a more descriptive term. And we're talking about a technique for evaluating the rising groundwater at the 2 GDE areas that were identified as the primary areas that we were concerned about in the GSPs. So the East Branch area on the west end of Fillmore and the Cienega Springs area. And so this technology is one where fiber optics are laid in the ground, and they have temperature sensors on them that are super sensitive, and you have a shallow one and a deep one, and the changes in temperature that you see due to groundwater moving past those sensors can be reverse calculated and turned into an estimation of flow there. So we put some money in there thinking that, the question of rising groundwater, how much, when, always comes up. And we always say, well, we have some data, but we don't have maybe as much as we want or as clear data as we want. So in this instance, we decided we would include a line item in there to try to gather some of that data in the upcoming 3-year window associated with this grant. So that's kind of the rundown through the project types that we sort of settled on based on your conversations and your guidance and directors, as well as conversations with United staff and the executive director. Again, note that November 30th is the deadline for this, so we've got to move along with these things. We've got a lot of little scopes of work to prepare for each one of these line items in here, and a little more detail on the budgeting and the costing and just general scope of work that would occur for each of those. So there's those kinds of things there that need to be done. I'm going to jump ahead one slide, and then we can come back and talk about the topics. But it made very clear from the DWR today that they need a board resolution to go in with your grant application. And so there's draft wording here. I mean, obviously you can format it and make it look pretty, and I just cut and pasted this out of their document. And there is an update to the wording. They've added some words right in here. I think this is now California Budget Act of 2021 and 2022. So we'll just download the latest version out of it. They cautioned us, don't deviate from the resolution language. Fill in the blanks where you need to fill in the blanks, but don't deviate from the resolution language. You'll insert your project names in there and that kind of thing for it. Projects that were not included in the GSP as potential management actions are still eligible. If it wasn't in the GSP, that does not preclude it from being in your grant application for round 2. So there was a little bit of concern and talk about that early on when the PSP came out for the grant application, but they put that to rest today. and said, no, it's okay. If you come up with something since you've submitted your GSP that you think you need to do a new project, that's okay. You're eligible to put that into your grant application also. So let me go backwards to that screen there, and I'll be quiet and open this up for conversation with the directors, with or between the directors. How about that?
All right, well, that's now our job as directors. Great presentation. I appreciate that you're bringing this back to us with further diving deep, and then also with what DWR is stating. I'm looking for any hands of any questions. Please note that our next board meeting is November 17th. And so this needs to be finalized, or that we need to provide the guidance to our staff to create the wording of the resolution and finalize this draft or this application and submit it. Am I correct on that?
Right.
Correct. Yes.
Okay, so it would be the application to move ahead with that along with the resolution. Okay. First hand up is Director Milligan.
Yeah, I do find it interesting, Tony, that they said go and see what your deficiencies are and ask for them and identify what they are. But,
Yeah.
And I also thought it was, as to your point, one of my comments was going to be, oh, so we get to submit the grant before the comments on our plan.
Correct.
But now that my gripes are out there, I think, you know, I was the one director on the board that didn't support the final GSPs in their formatting, because I felt that the sustainable management criteria for some of our GEs wasn't adequately addressed. That said, I think maybe under some future agenda items, we can add sending a letter to DWR asking for GDE guidance before the revisions are required, you know, so that we have better guidance. But to think that we aren't going to get that sort of feedback, I think would be naive. So I like to see number 14 there with the rising groundwater elevation at the basin boundaries. But I think maybe we need to unpack some things a little bit. When you say fiber optic distribution temperature sensing, can you explain that a little bit more to me so that I understand? Is this at a groundwater below the surface level sensing, right?
Sure. It's a technique that's used where they have long fiber optic cables, thousands of feet long, and they have sensors in them. Typically, now, if you're doing real detailed work, you'll have them every foot. If less detailed, maybe every 5 or 10 feet, something like that. And it has a very detailed, very precise temperature sensor there. And so you'll lay one of those cables below the surface, let's say 3 feet below the surface where you have rising groundwater. You'll put another one 1 foot below the surface, for example. Now, the depths can vary. You can go 5 and 1 or 5 and 3. It kind of depends on your topography and how you can get the thing installed. The idea is the temperature gradient that you see between the lower and the upper fiber optics cable, that temperature differential can be converted into a flow. So you can determine the flow rate of how much rising groundwater is going past those sensor cables. Okay. So we can get an idea of what's going on there. And so you can lay them out in a single line, or what you frequently see is they will coil them back and forth, you know, so you cover a more of an area rather than just a linear sampling. Yeah. You'll cover more of an area, and you'll do that at a lower and a higher elevation. And that's the technique. And without going into the physics of it, which I would probably botch if I tried to explain it in detail, but it's becoming a fairly common technique that's used. And I think we would probably reach out to a couple of the academics that have some grad students that are doing this kind of research, and they would probably be able to point us in the direction of where to get the equipment at a, an economical price and that kind of thing. And they may even have some grad students that could assist us with deployment and interpretation of the data if we wish. So I think it's a pretty sophisticated approach to it. It does require you to be out, in the area of rising groundwater and be able to place it in the ground. And so the executive director and I had some preliminary discussions, and I got 2 more gray hairs, and he lost a couple, I think, on his head when we said, is this subject to CEQA or not? And is that going to be a long-term effort we have to go to? So we need to have some more conversations about that. And we haven't picked a spot on the ground or anything like that. This is just preliminary at this point in time of, here's a concept. We think it's a good idea. Here's some general idea of the order of magnitude of monies we should be looking for if we wish to implement this kind of program. And then the charge for the next 30 days or so is to get this scope and budget refined for each one of these projects here. So there's a lot of writing and head scratching and noodling about how we would approach these projects.
All right, so my follow-up question is just, so from the in the ground readings, you're getting a flow reading, but are we getting a temperature reading in that flow reading?
You are getting a temperature reading in the sensor as well, yes.
And the flow.
And the flow, yes. It's the differential of those 2 temperatures is what we want. That's the information we need.
I'm just trying to make, because I was just like, we need to layer on hobos, which are like you leave them in the flow.
Yeah, I know what hobos are. Yeah, used them before.
We don't need those. This will cover the in-stream flow temperature.
It won't cover the in-stream because both of these lines will be buried. One, for example, a foot below surface, and the other one maybe 3 or 5 feet below surface. So that won't give you the temperature of the water ponded on the surface in the area.
Okay. Well, then I think my recommendation would probably be to purchase a number of hobos so that we can put them out in those flow events in our GDE areas, so that we are getting a surface water temperature reading. And then this is only one location, right, Tony?
The goal is to put one at each location, at each GDE, to get a better idea of it. Please don't think that these are going to cover square miles of territory. That's not the goal. The goal is to pick, and I'll work with United and our biological consultant to say, where would we best put this to get the most information that would be useful for helping the board make decisions later on. So where would we pick this to place? And people will put out, I've seen some studies where they're doing, 100 meter by 100 meter kind of areas that they're instrumenting.
Okay. I think my only recommendation to add to as a complementary, it would either be a complementary item to this, or there was another place where we spoke about the, we have other shallower wells. We're doing an analysis of something like that. Or did that drop off with this now?
No, there are the shallow wells in the Cienega Springs area, in that project area, those wells that are now in place. Those are there. Okay. And will continue to be used.
What I'm looking for is then the stream, the surface water temperature, so that we can try and do an analysis of like what's happening below the ground and through our shallow wells, our monitoring wells, and then this fiber optic distribution. And then a stream, a surface water temperature component.
Okay.
Then we could at least get some data that's can talk to the surface water, groundwater interactions a little bit more.
Okay, that would not be an overly complicated process to add hobos to this and distribute them out along wherever there is rising groundwater.
I'm just hesitant, folks, that if we don't put it in the grant, that we want to do some sort of endangered species specific monitoring. We're going to be asked to do it and then not have the money to do it.
I don't know. Any thoughts on that?
I mean, it's really hard not to have the guidance on groundwater dependent ecosystems from DWR.
Mhm.
Well, isn't it in the body of our GSA? So no matter what, if we ask for it in a grant, it's in the embodiment of our plan currently. No.
Well, right now we only have sustainable management criteria for the Cienega Springs stuff, you know, to groundwater stuff. You know, they likely going to come back and say in 5-year update you have to have sustainable management criteria for endangered southern steelhead. That's not gonna. I mean, that's not gonna fly. You know?
Well, and we still have to hear from them as well, right?
Correct. We have not gotten any feedback.
So we can't. I don't think it's appropriate for myself. I don't think it's appropriate to make assumptions. I guess GWR would state, well, look at the plans that have been approved already. But I would think that based on our stakeholders, all stakeholders, we need to be find out what DWR comes back with before we take other action.
So
not saying that we can't do it as a benefit, but not a mandate.
My only response to that is, you know, if we don't put it in the grant, then we're going to have to ask it from ratepayers later, right? And then it increases rate costs to pumpers. And so if we want to get ahead of it, we ask for it in the grant. Otherwise, then our ratepayers land up.
Well, okay.
Tony, my question is then, what did they say about sustainable management criteria for steelhead on Fox Canyon? Did they not ask Fox Canyon to address it in the 5-year update?
I'm trying to remember the exact wording and I don't. Sorry, I don't recall off the top of my head what they said regarding that.
Okay.
I mean, I know
Because
time is short, but I would definitely go check that to see if that's a requirement. And if it is a requirement, then we can very well expect that to be a requirement for us, in which case we should probably put money in for it.
I've made a note to go look that up.
Thank you.
Okay. Anything else? I want to make sure we got yours. Okay. Next, we'll ask is Director Jackson.
I just have a quick question, and that is why, is there a reason you did not include the removal of non-native species as a project on this list?
Yeah, there was a decision, consensus at the previous directors, from the directors, that they were not going to do it at this time.
And I think that was also similar to finding out what we heard back from DWR. Okay, Director Kimball. You're muted.
Yeah, sorry. I might have been one of the ones. I mean, the non-native removal, there's no point in removing it in the middle if it's still coming down the river. I firmly believe this is a project that needs to start upriver where it begins and work downriver, so that otherwise, I mean, you remove it and it just gets reseeded. from the upstream stuff. I'd love to do it, but I mean, it's very expensive just to physically remove it. And unless you get in and kill all the sprouts every year, it's going to come back. So it's not just a one-time removal. Tony, if we can get reimbursable costs through April 26th, can we add the 25 annual report, maybe even the 26 annual report?
We could add 25.
25, okay.
Yeah.
And the only other one is, do you think we're going to spend $1 million in GSP updates between the two plans for 5 years? Is that sort of the consensus among everybody?
That was the go big or go home number.
Okay.
Yeah. So again, we need to think about how much we want to put in there. But the goal was to make sure the total at the bottom of the column was more than $1 million, which was their minimum amount that they would fund. So, I mean, the measures max too, it's 20 million, but we're not anywhere near that. So these are go big or go home numbers. And then once we get more into what the scope turns out to be, once we set and put pencil to paper, so to speak, then we can refine these numbers, I think, and then bring those back to the board and say, here's the scope, here's the budget. We think that works with that scope. Do you concur?
Okay, good. And you can do that and have the grant written for in November if we meet on the 16th or whenever we do.
That's the goal. that means scrambling. That means moving fast on this. And I'm not suggesting it's necessary, but it may be advantageous at some point along the way to get some ad hoc committee help with some items if we get stuck on something. Yeah. And we don't know whether we want to turn left or turn right on a particular project. It might be helpful for that.
Yeah, and I for me, if you want to have a special board meeting to if that works easier or whatever, there's a lot to be done in between this chart and the grant, and there's not much time, and our input and our approval is awkward. So at least for me, I'm willing to have a special board meeting at any point between now and then, if that helps.
Okay, appreciate it. Thank you.
I would agree on that, specifically to ensure all stakeholders are represented. I think that's extremely important to do that. Yeah. Director Fornoff?
Yes, I'm on board with all of everyone here, and I think that the drought mitigation, the subsidence. I think that you're going to find that DWR is going to come back and focus on those more importantly. So I'm on board with asking for some money. It's crazy to think the state's going to give us money to prepare these reports that we submit to them, but why not take their money, right? So I'm a go.
Okay, and then also, I think that you had posted in the chat a question in regards to another third round of funding, grant funding. And I was going to ask Tony, in the meeting that you had with DWR on this, did they mention anything about coming back on a third round?
They have that option if there's money left. Okay. If they don't give it all out, they might come back with a third round. But I didn't get the perception that they were intending to hold back money, so that they could issue a third round. I felt like they were looking to hand out all the money now, and they're getting significant pressure, it sounds like, to get the money distributed because people are waiting, and get the money distributed, and so they can get started with their projects. And remember, the round one folks are also eligible to get money out of round two. Okay, well, so that means, and it does, there is a priority to the round to folks who didn't get money in round one. So if two of you scored at the exact same value in the ranking, and it made the difference between getting money or not, the preference would go to to the organization that did not get money historically out of round one.
Okay, and the grant funding that we received the first round was how much in each basin?
Round one, we were not eligible to compete for. It was only critically overdrafted basins.
Okay, thank you. And so this round, how much did they say on average do they think that each basin would be getting?
They have a pot of approximately $231 million, of which 57 million of that comes in next year's budget, and it's been earmarked, but it hasn't really been key to pass out yet. So, you know, they could get to a situation where they fall short by 57 million if that doesn't come through. But right now they're moving with 231 million is their best number they can calculate right now to hand out. So if you figure there's how many basins would there be? I don't remember how many basins there are that are high and medium anymore. But there's $1 million at least, 20 million on the top end. So I think that's a good sign that a lot of people will get funding for projects. There's plenty of money to go around.
Okay, the reason why I'm saying is it roughly 2 million on average? I'm concerned if we add more to this list, we will definitely not get it. And so I'm just being cautious, like when we do our IRWN with the project, we're looking at how much money in total, what percentage do we think we could get, how much would that be, and what were the crucial projects that we needed to get done.
And that's why we came up with the drought mitigation, subsidence, and the special studies, the rising groundwater, is thinking that the projects that are in those categories are the ones that are going to cause a twinkle in DWR's eye. That, oh yeah, we like this kind of stuff.
Okay.
We like that kind of work. So that's why we put those in there. And then the other things are just to cover your administrative costs, you know, all the reporting and things that they require of you. Why not ask for that kind of funding as well? And they mentioned today that you are eligible to ask for that kind of funding. So on the round one, I did a quick analysis, and there were a few entities that got everything they asked for, and they didn't. It didn't look like they were shaving their numbers. They had quite large numbers for a lot of their activities. You know, $2, $3, $4, $5 million kind of projects or grant applications. But of those who didn't get an award of 100% of what they asked for, the average was about 70%. They got 70% of what they asked for.
Okay, and I see Dan Dittmer said round one was 7.6 million per basin for qualifying proposals, not match requirements.
Yeah.
Okay, that's good.
Thanks, Dan. Thanks, Dan.
All right. Director Fornoff?
One question, Tony. Do we have to fund these projects prior to receiving the grant money?
Yes, it's reimbursement. It's a reimbursement process.
Okay, so we need to think about a cash flow situation, right?
Correct.
Okay.
Okay. What other questions do we have? Do we have any questions from the public? I don't see any. Everyone seems pretty quiet. I would say,
Chair Long, couple of comments. One we didn't talk too much about, but we will take a look at the cash flow, because as you know, on the grant we have right now, it's at least 6 months before we receive reimbursement. So that is a big consideration, even though this may be funding up to 100% of some of these activities, that, you know, we don't have a giant reserve that we can bank upon. So we'll take a look at that. And that was something that was tough for us in the first grant. I think we're going to make it across the finish line, and we're going to be fine on that, but we will take a look at that. And then one thing we didn't talk too much about was the stakeholder outreach, and some of our stakeholder outreach in the initial GSP effort was negatively affected to a certain extent by COVID. and we were not able to have as many in-person meetings. So, and that is, you know, I think we and lots of GSAs received comment letters. Some of them looked exactly the same from basin to basin. But that is a valid comment, and we all acknowledge that it was tough to do stakeholder outreach. So that is why, you know, we included some. And I think some of this would be, we would try to tailor it towards better identification and ways to communicate with our disadvantaged communities. We participated in Friends of the Santa Clara Rivers effort to the water talks, but you know, it's a very different thing when it's a Zoom meeting as opposed to in person. So there may be some things to do that we could work with the neighborhood council and Piru and with the city of Fillmore. And maybe that dovetails a little bit with the domestic well drought vulnerability evaluation that, you know, are there some of those shallow domestic wells that are 70 years old that might be associated with disadvantaged folks? I think, I mean, essentially both of these two basins are overlaid by disadvantaged community designation. So pretty much everywhere we go, these two basins, we have that. But those were a couple other, oh, and one other thing, I was reminded of a comment that I believe EJ Remsen brought up when we were talking about the Cienega Springs Drought Refuge Pilot Program, is that I believe a request that he talked about was, a statement along the lines of, I get it that wholesale removal of large stands of Arendo is an extremely expensive and difficult proposition. But I believe that he put something out there for consideration to say, but if you have these droughts and you have some die off of some of these native plants in these critical areas, would the board consider some help in keeping those areas from getting colonized by the invasives, which may reestablish more quickly? So that's a little more nuanced. And you know, maybe some of that could be woven in with the Drought Refuge Pilot Program. So so we can talk about that more, but you know, that might be the way, in a smaller way, to incorporate some of that in a very targeted area that we would agree, without having to go out with a dozer and a shredding machine. And so some of this is going to be developing this with those that are already doing the projects in those areas, and see if there are targeted ways that the agency could help with that. So that's one of our tasks, is to get back with that group that's already working there, and you know, see if we can dovetail this well.
Go ahead.
I was just gonna say, like, there is the there's the Aranda watershed wide effort, but there was also like a task team, and it was, and to Tony's point about like that opportunistic approach. So it's not only when there's dieback because of drought, but when there's been like a fire. So say now there's a wilderness encampment and there is a fire, there's an opportunity to go in and like get all the Aranda out by just doing some spraying, rather than and then it's way more cost effective than the big stands. So I think, you know, if it's like a 3.1, like a subtask under Cienega Springs, where it's like an adaptive approach to Aranda removal, when it's opportunistic and cost effective, that there's that flexibility within that line item, because you've identified it as a subtask under number 3. I would definitely be supportive of that. With regards to the special studies, I'm wondering if we could do something similar, you know, with regards to presence, absence when they are fish. that like when we do have standing water, at those times when we know that fish are migrating, that we actually have the funding to do some analysis, like presence absence analysis, so we know if we're having an impact or not. That doesn't have to be expensive. You know, it's like 3 people doing some monitoring. I mean, looking at these huge budgets, it doesn't have to be a lot of money, but I think at least we would be making a good faith effort of showing DWR that we are giving consideration to endangered species within the budget. I don't know if that's a number 15 special study or if it's under drought mitigation, but you definitely have, you know, disconnected pools where fish can be stranded or isolated in warming pools, which could be a concern.
I have a comment, and that is that when we talk about special studies, I know in the GSP, we did identify specific data gaps, I believe. And it does seem to me that whatever special studies are in this grant application, they should be directly related to whatever data gaps we identified in the GSP and not add. And I don't know, Candace, if that is, I'm not that familiar with the GSP, gotta admit. So I'm not sure what you're talking about is in there. But in general, I do think we should limit these studies to what we have identified as data gaps in the GSP.
And Director Mennigan, I was going to follow on to what you were saying, is that there is a IRWM program grant that's actually highly likely, because we do know the funding split between the Los Angeles County and Ventura County. So the 5 projects that the Watershed Coalition of Ventura County recommended funding, I think they're highly likely to be approved by DWR. DWR still has sort of veto power on those, but there is the one that is, I believe it's a little bit more than $1 million study that's being led by UCSB and put forward by Stillwater, and United's going to participate in that and some previous matching work. And I, as far as I remember, there is part of the scope to do some, like you were talking about, all the way from the fish hatchery area down to the reach just below Freeman Diversion to do some presence absence as well as some vegetation mapping. So that may be something that that's already being done in this reach. So that might be a good thing to check with Tom Dudley at UCSB or Bruce Orr, who's still technically on the DBS and 18, but not doing too much on the nickel of this organization. But there may be we can check on that because that may be covered by that grant activity.
I think, thank you for bringing that up, Tony, because I think it is, yeah, they know what programs are going, so I wouldn't want to ask for duplication.
Yeah, so definitely have Tony Morgan or Tony Emmerich just verify that so that we don't have that happening. Thank you.
Okay, so what are the next steps? If we were to approve this draft and we receive the resolution suggestion, what would be the next steps?
Go ahead.
Okay, so the next step is we've got to get our head around what kind of submittals we need to give to DWR, and it's not like the old days where you would make a PDF of your application and mail it in. It's all online. You fill in the text box on the screen, cut, paste, drop it in the text box, and off it goes to DWR. So, but we do need to set and come up with a scope of work and a budget and a rationale for each one of these projects on here. And so that won't be an insignificant thing. They don't give you a whole lot of space to do that. You get like max 4 pages for each task, for each one of these projects as we've got them identified here. So it's not a lot. The budgets are very, very high level budgets. They don't want the gory detail, but I think it's necessary for us to look at the detail in a little bit so we make sure we're putting in adequate funds and we're covering the major expenses that we're likely to incur there. So we need to get pedaling very fast on preparing those scopes of works of things. And I've got a couple of folks that are grant type people in our organization standing by who've raised their hand and said they'd be willing to get in the boat and help row. All I have to do is yell for help. So we may avail ourselves of them to help us with making sure we're dotting all the I's and crossing all the T's, of which there are many, many associated with a grant application like this.
Okay, so do we need a special meeting?
Chair Long, it seems like that would make sense, that, you know, maybe halfway between this meeting and the next one, that we can return with some drafts and maybe some refined numbers, and we can get a, you know, a thumbs up vote on this, and then we could come back at the regular board meeting with the resolution and, you know, a little bit closer draft of this.
Okay, well, we have 2 weeks. It's November 3rd as it's due, right?
30th.
Oh, phew. So
Yes.
November 30th, right?
I did get more gray hair when you
Correct.
said the 3rd.
Okay, so then there's November 17th is our next board meeting. Would that be enough time or not? It's 4 weeks.
You know, and having to put, so our work product in putting together an agenda package is about a week ahead of time. So that gives us
Till November 10th.
a couple weeks.
Couple weeks, yeah.
To put the work
Yeah.
together. That having something sooner than that may not be too helpful.
Okay, that, you know me, I'm looking at the timeline.
So I think we're going to need some time to chew on some of those.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah, and remember there's Thanksgiving between our meeting and the 30th too. So
Yes.
we can't do a special meeting the week of Thanksgiving. Like,
And why is it these grants applications always come up at holiday time? DWR must love this.
Oh, someone had an idea about it, but I won't say. So with that, then our meeting is on the 17th. We would review the final product then. It would give you 2 weeks to produce as much as you can to put in the packet for the November 10th to go for the 17th. And you would bring any modification to the 17th meeting that you have.
And we would, and Chair Line, we would endeavor to bring the resolution so
Yes.
that could be done ahead of time and included in the package.
Yes.
Okay, yes. All right, so how would you like this motion? Is a receive and file and to direct staff to come back on the November 17th meeting with the application and the resolution?
Draft application would be preferred.
Okay, draft application and the draft resolution.
That would work.
Okay, so that would be the motion, I believe, unless someone who firsts it needs to word it in a different way. So can I get a motion to what I said?
So moved.
Okay, Director Kimball, thank you. And a second?
I'll second.
Thank you, Director Fornoff. And then roll call, please, Ina.
Okay, Director Fornoff,
Aye.
Director Jackson,
Aye.
Director Kimball,
Aye.
Chair Long,
Aye.
Director Minigan, Director Villaseñor. Aye. Perfect.
Thank you very much. That motion is approved unanimously. And I just like to say that that's a lot of work and thought to goes through to these presentations. and to understand what we've done, what we can. And so I really want to say thank you to both Tony and all of staff that is putting this together. Steve as well. He's always checking us to make sure we're legal. I really appreciate it. It makes the discussions here very valuable because we have a lot of information for us to digest and to go over. So thank you. Just as your chair, you guys make life a lot easier. So.
Good.
All right, with that, that is the last item on the agenda, except for future topics for discussion. So we agreed on also to bring back at a later time where we would have our meetings and what would a hybrid be, or if we can do hybrid at a location, that would be good. And then also I would like to ask for the calendar of meetings.
Yeah.
To come back and to make sure we have 2 board members. We have, life happens. Is this the right time and date? I might as well just confirm with everybody. And so we can have that discussion. Not saying we're going to change anything, but just to make sure that we ask these questions. So if we can bring that date, that calendar back, that'd be great.
Will do.
Anyone else for items?
Not for future items, but whenever we have the details on Glenn's celebration, that would be helpful.
Oh, yes. Could we please send that out for everyone, the email talking about
Yes.
details? That'd be wonderful. Okay, well, good catch on that. And we will be adjourned.
Oh, no,
tonight,
I
and
had a
we-
future item.
Oh, yes, please go ahead.
It was the letter to DWR urging them to please provide guidance on the groundwater dependent ecosystems. We don't have guidance, and we want guidance for the 5-year update.
Okay.
If everyone is in agreement that that's necessary, I think it's important.
Well, we'll bring it back. We'll bring it back to the meeting.
Thank you.
Okay. Anyone else? I apologize. The senor, that's a thumbs up, not a hand raise, so she's good. Anyone else? Okay.
Well,
Everyone, go
sorry, I
ahead.
do have just a follow-up that is listed here, in the follow-up is that Tony Morgan is going to check regarding the Fox Canyon and the request from Director Menahing. Yeah, so I just wanted to make sure that's part of it. Okay, great.
Good catch. All right, anyone else? Okay, thank you so much. I'll see you guys next November 17th at 5 o'clock on Zoom. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
All right, bye now.
Thank
Good
you.
night.
Good night.
Thank you, everyone. Good night.
Right.